Next on stage, I'm very happy to introduce a panel that will discuss setting the manufacturing standard in Michigan. Very, very important now that we are legalized in the state. There's so much infrastructure to put into place. So to moderate, I'll first introduce Allan Lengel, co-founder of Deadline Detroit. Allan, come on stage. Formerly seen on Detroit News and the Washington Post. Next, I'll introduce to you Michael Elias, CEO and co-founder of Common Citizen. Come on stage. Let's give him a round of applause, guys.
Good idea. Thank you. All right. Okay. All righty. So, Michael, tell us a little bit about your company and what you guys are doing and what makes you stand out as being different here in Michigan.
Sure. So Common Citizen is the company. Michigan Pure Med is the parent company. And Common Citizen is a customer-facing brand. We're a human-centric, purpose-driven brand. The goal is
when did you start? When did you first?
4 years ago.
4 years ago.
4 years ago, yeah. We hit the ground running in Michigan, tying up real estate and doing what every other operator did when they saw the writing on the wall. So we were able to launch our brand about 3 months ago. Flint is the first store. So Common Citizen is really designed to elevate the everyday for everyone. And the goal is to really reflect the communities that we're in and accelerate the normalization of consumption by bringing in folks that look like you and I. So the model is really designed to be a movement to accelerate the normalization by reflecting the communities that we're in and cutting across different racial lines, socio-demographics. If you can't see yourself in the store, there's a high probability you won't think about consumption. The brand is designed to cater to the 88% of those who don't consume today. And by doing that, you need to lead with a completely different model. Some of the things that Peter brought up in the last panel resonate with us. So the idea is to really just raise the level of class and sophistication and drive that emotional connection. People don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And Nike doesn't sell shoes, they sell a dream. And then you get emotional about it, and then you obviously buy shoes. And so we're really driving a lifestyle brand. You can see that in the Flint store.
Yeah. And can you be more specific in terms of when you talk about the brand and what distinguishes you?
So there are a number of things that I think distinguish us. Before I got into cannabis, I ran a 450-bed quaternary facility. I spent 21 years in healthcare driving operational excellence at the bedside. So I'm very familiar with the plight of patients and family. I went to Michigan State, went to Wayne State School of Medicine, disappointed my parents, never became a physician, but became an industrial engineer. And one of the things that I've learned in healthcare is lean manufacturing, believe it or not. So I'm a Toyota trained lean sensei and a GE master black belt. Spent 21 years in healthcare trying to optimize very complex clinical processes in highly regulatory, highly unionized environments. When I look at cannabis as a manufacturing process, it has nowhere near the level of variation we see in a clinical setting. And that excites me in a huge way because, I spent about 20 years trying to retrofit a continuous improvement culture on a defective one. And in the process, I lost a lot of follicles. It's not easy to get physicians, PT, OT, social work to work together to drive a strategic outcome. And so when I think about where we're at, on day one, we have the ability to pick our culture. On day one, we have the ability to drive lean thinking at a executive level, all the way down to the guy pushing the mop. We have a very rigorous training program where every single individual who's touching a unit of work in the manufacturing space understands how to bring rigor and improvement and a new language to how they go about making change. Lean on its surface looks like a tool, but it's a true business philosophy. So I drove that at North York General Hospital. North York, after about 12 years, just got the designation of being one of the best hospitals in the world. Top 100 in the world by Newsweek, and second best in all of Canada in terms of clinical outcomes and efficiency. So all I'm doing is taking a page book out of my learnings and transforming that system into the manufacturing space. So that gives us a significant competitive advantage. This is not about taking black belts and using them at a sub-process level. This is about taking that methodology and driving it into our strategic framework. I always tell my team, mile wide, inch deep, and you'll see from my colleague David, who's coming up next, or next around 12:30, what we mean by keeping it an inch wide and a mile deep. As an industrial engineer, it's critically important that we limit the geography so we can accelerate the failures to standardizing an operating system, and then as we pick up fragmented entities, we have the ability to wrap that standard around those entities and actually look like a real business. So we're not in the business of trying to be the biggest and baddest, even though we are the largest license holder in the state to date with 45. It is about getting proof of concept, going deep, standardizing that operating system, and then spreading that over the next state or the next asset or whatever we end up looking at. So we're limited to Michigan right now.
What are you doing in terms of the pushing the good manufacturing practice in the state itself? What are your efforts?
Yeah, so I appreciate you bringing that up. So as a healthcare guy, there's not a thing we do in a complex acute care environment unless safety is considered first. You can't get market share, you can't get revenue, you can't move that business if safety isn't in check. And when I look at the end of the supply chain in the cannabis space, there's still a patient at the end of that supply chain. And those folks are generally already immunocompromised. To so further compound that by passing on products that are defective is just not good business. And so we are taking a page book out of the FDA. Food and Drug uses GMP to ensure that there is safe handling of raw materials, that we don't contaminate at a process level. Today, the postmortem assessment of defects through the lab is not sufficient to mitigating risk. From a statistical standpoint, it does not give us enough power to extrapolate to the rest of the batch, whether it's contaminated or not. So I don't want to geek out on anybody on the applied stats side, but there's some fundamental issues with the way we're sampling today. And so I don't believe it's good business to not start bringing GMP into the design of our facilities today. Yes, it's an additional cost, but again, we will not compromise safety. So I just wrote an op-ed I got picked up by the Detroit News last Monday, and it is essentially centered on that need to really get regulators to start holding us a little bit more accountable to GMP.
And is the state of Michigan prepared right now to regulate? What's going on in that space right now?
Well, they got a lot of moving parts, and we barely got the regs to settle on the medical market, and now we're promulgating rules and getting into the rec space. So they got a lot going on. Now, the thing about GMP is that they don't necessarily need to create the infrastructure to support it. They just need to reference the FDA GMP standards and then have third-party auditors who already exist in the space to come audit and enforce. So there's no additional infrastructure that's needed from a regulatory standpoint, and then that would elevate us, elevate all the manufacturers in the space.
In terms of regulating, are we going to see any difference? Right now we're in the medical space. We're going to move over to recreational. If we get the medical space down correctly in terms of the quality and all that stuff, are we all set for recreational, or are there going to be additional things needed?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, right now, from an evidence-based standpoint, we got a saying in my world, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And today, there's not enough data to really differentiate the two products. A medical product looks like a rec product. And so I think we're ready. Anyone that's in the business of trying to get tooled for a medical market, I think could toggle beautifully into the rec space. So I don't think there's going to be any big transitions there. But I'm interested what my partner Jeff over here might think.
How, in terms of regulating distribution, obviously, I mean, we see it with alcohol all the time. You know, we see it in movies where 16-year-olds are hanging out in front of 7-Eleven asking someone to buy a six-pack for them. What concerns do you have in terms of people buying on behalf of people who aren't old enough to buy at a distribution center?
All we can do at the retail level is reinforce and ensure that the people coming in that door are legally capable of coming through that door. I think at the end of the day, people will do what they do. I remember asking my brother to buy me booze when I was a kid. I mean, it was boons. I thought I was on cloud nine. So I mean, that will continue. You know, just swap out any product. You're going to have that issue with any.
And I see we've changed over time, and I've covered federal law enforcement, and we saw under the Obama administration where they, Eric Holder, the Attorney General, was basically telling the DEA, like, lay off the marijuana bus. You know, we don't need to focus on that. Now we come into the Trump administration, and we had Jeff Sessions, who was like demonizing marijuana. How do you see, if Trump is reelected, do you see any problems with this industry, or do you see the Democrats being more beneficial to the industry?
You know, I'm not a Democrat or a Republican.
Tricky question.
I'm a capitalist, and I stay out of that discussion. It's hard for me to predict what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, do you have to pay attention to the political landmines
100%.
out there?
There's no question. But the problem is, we got so many moving parts with the vertical that we have, and it's very easy to be tangential and knee-jerk strategy every day with the news that we get. And, it's just important to really keep our heads down, execute, drive good manufacturing practices, drive lean manufacturing, and connect emotionally with the customer coming in that door. I don't care how much we put into brand or fancy packaging. At the end of the day, it comes down to the connections at the retail level, the humans that are connecting, and that's really been my focus.
Okay. And what's your message to the community in terms of your mantra, your message, in terms of your product and what you stand for? So
we've had 12,000 years of a harmonious relationship with this plant. Only in the last 70 years have we created a ridiculous number of misconceptions. Common Citizen's all about unraveling those misconceptions at the retail level. Every single one of our dispensaries, we actually call them chapters, in line with more of a movement mentality. We try to slow people down. Our average turnaround time for a customer or patient coming through the door is roughly 45 minutes to an hour. These are folks that have no clue what cannabis is like. And so from the time they walk in, they're handed a book called the Citizen Code, and in it distills down all this terminology that is foreign to those on the fringes and breaks it down to terms that they can understand. Yes, we honor the past. We got the OG Kushes, the Han Solo burger, the Pug's Breath. I get it all. But as a healthcare guy, it's important to educate. It's important to handhold. It's important to put your arms around them. And it's important to sit down, have a discussion about what their anxieties are. So most of our dispensaries, our provisioning centers, our chapters, have a cafe built into them. We pull in Foster's Coffee from Flint, Michigan. We bring the community into the space, and we have a discussion over a very familiar product, coffee, very benign, and we have many conversations with those who have never consumed, and it's been amazing. The reaction to that model has been amazing. So people say, well, why aren't you seating and streeting? That's very unlean of you to tie up people for 45 minutes. But at the end of the day, it's a math problem, right? You got takt time, you got cycle time, you got volume, demand. We can find a way to tool and not compromise the service that we're giving. That to me is paramount.
Obviously, I mean, we're in a period right now, it's like the gold rush. Everybody wants to get into the space. It seems like infinite possibilities. Do you worry about oversaturation? Do you worry at some point that it's just oversaturation is going to ruin the market?
Yeah.
Or
today we got a shortage. Tomorrow we got an oversupply issue. We're passing out licenses in Michigan like candy, and I think that's an issue. At the end of the day, I think if if we can find a way to balance the supply, and this is not something I'm just coming up with. All you have to do is look out west. There are case studies all around us. And if we're trying to regulate the market and elevate the game, the cost of compliance, we're paying $45,000 to $66,000 per license times 45 a year. That's what I got to pay. I mean, at some point, we're going to have to find a way to protect the industry to a certain extent. And if we can't compete because we're allowing oversupply and that price per pound is coming down, and we're doing everything we can to be efficient, it's going back to the black market, and it unravels everything that the state's trying to do. I mean, that's just very basic. I'm not a genius when it comes to these things, but it just seems illogical to not think about how to find creative ways to not destroy the little guy, but to find a cohesive, harmonious way to coexist and still not destroy the supply chain.
And what about when you mentioned the black market? Do you see it disappearing totally, or do you see you being competitive with the black market, or how is that going to
Black
play
market
out?
is here to stay. It's not going anywhere. If anything, it might be muted, hopefully through some enforcement. But at the end of the day, as operators like us, well-capitalized operators with a 1.2 million square foot campus in Marshall, Michigan, in which 200,000 square feet just went up, we have the ability to create SKUs that the guy in the house is not going to be able to do, and we just got to differentiate ourselves like any other business. So I'm not against competition. I think it's amazing. It's just finding ways to bring in common sense regulations and be able to compete on an even playing field. That's all.
You've got a big space in Marshall. You've got to grow out there. How do you see this industry impacting the real estate industry?
I think for the most part, when you're talking about provisioning centers, and you see a lot of classy ones, we got a lot of dilapidated buildings that are being heavily invested in. That can only help the communities that we're in, no question about it. But I haven't really put much thought to anything else in the real estate space, other than we're getting freaking gouged right now. So everybody thinks we're making money hand over fist. So it's not the case.
What are the biggest expenses when you talk about starting out these types of businesses?
It is the most expensive startup in the history of mankind, no question. The expenses are numerous. I mean, everything from brand to obviously the facility's massive pig eats up a ton of money. 1.2 million.
Legal fees?
Yeah, the legal fees are astronomical. I mean, we could sit here for an hour and talk about all the fees, but for the most part, we're in a perpetual state of raising capital. We're in a perpetual state of development, and it needs to be fed. Those things, the portfolio is large, and it needs to be fed. So.
And do you see the cigarette companies moving into this space as well? I mean, and how's that going to impact people like you?
Well, I think there could be some synergies there, no question about it. And yes, they are moving into the space, and we'll wait and see what that's going to look like. I think obviously they're chock full of cash and have the ability to actually, take over some of these smaller operations, and I think it's an exit strategy for some.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm tired of hearing myself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Alan.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.